Hi, Dr. Ben. I hope you are doing well. Welcome to Habitat Hero. And this is my final presentation for the Deep Learning Application course. The contents of this presentation include the problem, data sources, previous efforts, model evaluation, and metric selection, modeling approach, the demo, and a conclusion. So in the status quo, one of the biggest problems that wildlife animals like elephants, rhinos, gorillas, and tigers face is endangerment or reaching endangerment. And according to the IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, at least 38,500 species are currently threatened and over 16,300 are endangered, which is where my application comes in. My application serves as an educational foundational tool that helps individuals learn a little bit more about wildlife animals and the way that we can help these wildlife animals avoid extinction in the near future. So I primarily used two data sources. First one was Unsplash. The second one was the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Unsplash is really cool because it gives users access to a lot of high resolution images, which I especially wanted for my YOLO V5 model, which I trained. And it also has a collection of over 5 million images from more than 330,000 photographers, which gives you a wide variety of images, especially for a singular animal of focus. Excuse me. And the second source here, we have the Worldwide Fund for Nature, which is a non-governmental organization based out of Switzerland. And their primary mission is to raise awareness about the carbon footprint that humans are emitting and how to preserve our natural habitat. Both the WWF website provided a lot of really cool insights into these 29 focused classes of animals. And it gave me a wide variety of textual information that I could use for developing my database, which was MongoDB. Now I'm going to go a little bit over the literature review. We have two here. The first is the iNaturalist species classification and section data set. This paper was really cool because it introduced a state-of-the-art imbalanced data set of over 859,000 images across 5,000 different species. It's what really inspired me to utilize CBAT to create my own data set, and it showed me different ways that data augmentation can be used in order to diversify your training set for the training process. Second, we have past, present, and future approaches using computer vision for animal re-identification from camera trap data. This dives a little bit more into the deep learning component, where it uses object detection to understand animal behavior and ecological dynamics between different populations, which I thought was very cool because I was able to essentially combine both of these papers, some ideas that I got from both of them. One was how to create a proper training set data via the first paper. And the second one was how do I use state-of-the-art deep learning models in order to create an application for good, which in this case is raising awareness about wildlife animals. Um, these are the two papers that I primarily used as an inspiration for my application. So for the data pre-processing, there's three primary steps. Number one, I use Unsplash for gathering all the images of various classes of animals. I'll dive a little bit deeper into those animals in a second when I talk about the modeling process. I then use CBAT in order to manually annotate 915 images, and I drew bounding boxes around all animals with proper bounding box class verification for all of them. Third, I also used an AWS S3 bucket to take all the data and host it onto a platform where I can easily access the data. I split the data between train, validation, and test set. I also split the annotation files between train, validation, and test. So there should be two folders up there, one for the labels and one for the images, each with subfolders with train, validation, and test, so that everything's nice and tidy and ready for the training process. So this is my primary data pipeline. The user can upload an image of a wildlife animal or multiple animals within an image. And the fine-tuned YOLO V5 model, which is fine-tuned on 29 classes, will then detect the animals within the image. It will then take the names of all those animals and put them into a curated prompt that I created on the back end, which makes it more efficient for the GPT to generate an output. It then takes that prompt with the animal names and then puts it through an OpenAI embedding model. It then takes those vectorized embeddings and performs a cosine similarity search against the MongoDB Atlas, which contains information, like I mentioned, from the WWF. It essentially takes text from text files and puts them onto the MongoDB database. That's the pipeline I used. And so now we cross-reference the query of focus as well as the vector embeddings located within MongoDB to get the relevant chunks. And the query plus the relevant chunks together is then passed to the GPT 3.5 Turbo model, it's the API. And then we get the output, which is the animal of focus, its endangered status, and ways that we as humans can help. I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about the classical ML approach, which in this case was an SVM approach. So to pre-process all the image, one of the first things I had to do was extract hog features, which are histogram of gradient features from the images, and also tag each image to a class ID. So the way that the data was structured was I had each row represent a image, and then each column represent a hog feature, and the target variable being the class ID. I know that this is a little bit different from object detection itself because it's a little bit more classification, but I was trying to find a way that I can really, it's really hard, I guess, to make an object detection model into a classical model. So in this case, one thing I did realize was a lot of the images ended up having only a single animal. So it was a little bit easier for the SVM model to really focus on one animal instead of two. And when there were multiple, the model obviously had a very, very tough time distinguishing the animals within a single picture or an image. And the conclusion that I noticed was that the values were terrible. As you can see here, ideally we would want a diagonal line between the predicted and true labels, but as you can see here, there's a very little overlap between the two, which means that the model performed pretty terribly. And you can kind of see the metrics that I used here, precision, recall, and the F1 score. If you look at the F1 score, which is a harmonic balance between the precision and recall, you have 0.14, which means that the model did a pretty bad job predicting the class ID based on the hog features within an image. I hope that goes a little bit more into the SVM and how I was able to detect what images corresponded to what animal. Now I want to shift my focus to the naive model. So one of the first things that I wanted to do was compare how the YOLO V5 model performed in different settings. In this case, I wanted to freeze the first 24 layers and then unfreeze the rest and then perform training on those layers. One of the things that I noticed is that the model ended up being pretty poor, especially when using the evaluation metric, which was the mean average precision at a 50% IOU, which is the intersection of union. This essentially looks at how closely the predicted bounding boxes overlap, or how the predicted bounding box overlaps with the actual bounding box with an IOU threshold of 50%. As you can see here, across all the classes on the test set, the MAP at 50 was 0.539, which essentially is like a coin flip, which is not exactly what we want in this case, which is kind of odd also because you would think that freezing the layers would make the model perform better. But one thing I noticed was that actually unfreezing all layers and training from the entire model ended up being a lot better, which leads me into my actual model that I used for my application. Here you can see that the MAP across all classes was 0.845, which is on a scale of 0 to 1, a lot better than the previous 0.539. So there's a very, very significant jump in performance. And there are some fine nuances, however. If you look at the bat, koala, whale, and zebra, all of these had relatively lower MAP at 50 values. And I assume that's primarily because these were the classes that were the most undersampled within the training data set. So in the future, actually including more training data for these classes may actually bolster that MAP value so that the model sees more instances and more variations of the bat, koala, whale, and zebra. So in essence, the MAP at 50, I think, was a very, very good metric to really see the difference. The MAP at 50 to 95 is a more stringent threshold because it's taking the average across those different IOU percentages. But nevertheless, here you can see 0.391, which is a lot lower than 0.639. But that dip in value is expected since it's a more stringent threshold. So here's a visualization of the results. You can see in the confusion matrix here between the true and predicted, you see a very, very nice line here, which is exactly what we want, meaning that the true and predicted ended up being matching, which is exactly what we want. However, one thing that should be noted is that the model did struggle sometimes between the background as well as an image, and you can kind of see those errors down here. On the right-hand side, you see the PR curve. This is a good curve to understand because it shows the harmonic balance between both the precision and the recall. And you can see here that across all classes, we had a 0.845 MAP at 50% IOU. And that was further mentioned in the, that was previously mentioned in the previous slide. But you would want this blue line to be as close to this top right-hand side as possible, because that shows that there was a high precision and a recall. But in this case, there is room for improvement. And over the course, like I mentioned, increasing the training data may create this, may reduce this, this space right here. So here are some of the fun results. You can see that the model sometimes struggled with smaller, when the animal was smaller in proportion to the actual image, like this rhinoceros, so it wasn't able to do a justice here. Here, there are 2 dolphins, but it only labeled 1. So sometimes it struggles when animals are very close together. And here, a cat and a tiger. This tiger was labeled as a cat, and I think it's probably because of the ears. But creating more training data may help the model see those fine nuances a little bit better than before. But nevertheless, it does a pretty good job. Elephant, turtle, coyotes, zebras, the bee, hippopotamus, the whale, the antelope, etc. So when it comes to RAG, one of the main things I wanted to see was how the cosine similarity between the results of the model as well as the actual answer and how those two are similar to each other. And when across 7 different questions, and here are some of the sample questions, I noticed that the RAG performed a whole lot better than the GPT 3.5 regular turbo. So this shows that RAG was able to provide the GPT model more relevant information that made the output a lot better than just using the standard GPT 3.5 Corpus. And here are some of the questions. Can you explain how the Indonesian Borneo pet trade has impacted the Bornean orangutan? It's a very specific question, which is why GPT 3.5 may not have been able to really provide a good answer for that. I'm going to go into my demo real quick here. So this is my Flask app that's hosted on GCP. And we can upload an image here. And this has the purpose, additional resources, instructions, methodologies, just for people to kind of understand. And here's the output. You can click on penguin or any one of the animals that's detected. And here it will give you information about the penguin, its endangered status, as well as physical characteristics and ways that we can help. This uses retrieval augmented generation, like I mentioned earlier. And here you can see that the object in the picture is a penguin. And it also tells you some conservation efforts and ways that we can help the penguin avoid extinction in the future. But let's say I wanted a little bit more information. What are some of the primary threats to the penguin? This chatbot will use retrieval augmented generation, RAG, in order to get all the relevant chunks to the question at hand. And here it gives you all the information as to what's currently affecting it, such as climate change, as well as pollution. These are 2 huge problems that penguins are facing that we need to mitigate. And this gives an educational platform for people to understand. And you can go back to upload another image to go back. Last but not least, I want to go over my conclusion. The MAP across all classes was 0.845. The MAP at 50 to 95 was 0.639. I ended up seeing that RAG outperformed the standard GPT 3.5. But, and I also noticed that fully training the entire model will give you a much better result than freezing the first 24 layers. 915 images, maybe not enough. Increasing it will bolster the performance in the future. I definitely have to include more classes so that the application could be more widespread to a broader range of animals. And experimenting with different versions of YOLO may help bolster the MAP values in the future. So these are just some key takeaways that I got. Last but not least, thank you, Dr. Bent. You've been awesome. The class was great. Thanks for your support, and please keep in touch. Thank you.